Hi, and welcome to Feel Good, a marketing podcast. It is officially season 4 of our podcast, and we are excited to start things off with a topic that is either on the tip of your tongue or the tip of your fingers. The topic for today is all about ChatGPT and AI. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I am Merissa, Creative Director here at Clementine Creative Agency, and I am joined today by Jennifer Nilsson, our Managing Director, and Paula Buckner, our Senior Graphic Designer. Hi, ladies.
Hello.
Hello.
So I really wanted to bring you guys in here specifically for this conversation because I think you guys bring a different perspective to ChatGPT and this AI generation that's happening right now. It is a very interesting topic, and I think that it has a lot of positives and maybe a couple of negatives that we can go over. And I really want this to be just kind of a conceptual conversation about what we've experienced and what we think is to come for ChatGPT and AI.
Great.
So Jennifer, you come to it from a copywriting, and you are our wordsmith extraordinaire. So I think that you can probably lead us in the direction on the word and language model. And then Paula, as our graphic designer, you have the visual eye and you can speak to more of the visual generators that are out there. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys today.
Yeah.
So it's still fairly new to many of us. I know ChatGPT started and kind of launched around November of 2022. So it's still fairly fresh, and I'm not sure that many of our audience has a lot of experience with it. And I know we've kind of all been experimenting, just kind of playing with it and trying to figure it all out. So I wanted to get a little bit of a feel for some of the terminology, help us kind of understand what it is. So Jennifer, if you want to give us a go-to here for description terms and things.
Yeah, I'm by no means an expert, but I think that ChatGPT is probably the name that everybody has been hearing a lot in the news and online for the last few months since they released. So ChatGPT is an AI chatbot program that was developed by OpenAI. And it really just sources information from textbooks, from websites, from articles that it can find, and then it uses those to generate responses to prompts that you kind of feed into the system. It is really a chatbot in terms of functionality. So a lot of the initial talk about, how to use this was kind of angled toward customer service. I mean, you think like an online customer service type of experience where you're conversing back and forth with this chatbot. But of course, once it was out there, people have taken it and really run with it and have done all sorts of things with it. So, not just the customer service application, but writing content, writing ad copy, writing blog posts, apparently writing term papers, which may not be the great idea, but doing all kinds of things. So, but ChatGPT is really, like you mentioned, the language based. It's a text based program specifically, and I know there are others out there that are more visual focused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from a visual standpoint, where you see AI the most is with TikTok, the AI filters they've been on there for years. So people are putting makeup on and putting dancing Shrek in places that he really isn't. But now it's kind of evolved. What really started a firestorm early this year was that people were putting themselves in different art styles, which touched off a really big conversation about the legality of AI. And so we'll get into that later. But, as far as like from a graphic design standpoint, it's still new and it still has a lot of flaws.
Has a lot of learning to do.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Understood. Yeah. So how does it, as a user, I mean, I think that we've all, whether we know it or not, have experienced some sort of AI-based technology, generally speaking, in like a customer service forum or something like that. So we're all kind of familiar with how that works. But if you wanted to take more of an active role in it, how do you get started? Kind of what is that process? What does it feel like? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, from a ChatGPT perspective, when you're talking about the language-based one, it really is just a website. You go on the website and it has a box sitting there for you to ask it a question, and so you just put a prompt in and it'll generate a response back to you like almost instantaneously. It really just takes a few seconds depending on how much you're asking it to generate. I think it's like any other system. What you get out of it is based on the quality of what you're putting into it. Mm-hmm. So the more specific you can be in terms of the prompt that you're giving it and, really pointing it in the right direction of the things you want it to look at. So whether that's, from a business perspective, using industry terms or being really specific about the format that you want out or the length that you want or the tone of voice that you want it to use, things like that. You can include all of that in the prompt that you're giving the system to try and really fine tune the output as much as possible in terms of what you're going to get back from the system. But yeah, it's really just kind of like going into an old school chat room and type something in the box and see what comes back.
Yeah, I found it very fascinating, like how quickly it actually does develop a result. Mm-hmm. Just kind of before your eyes, even with the visual based things, it kind of forms this starting point and then you see it render into full form. And it's kind of incredible how quickly it works mm-hmm. and gives you such a variety in that as well. And it's almost, being a creator and thinking of how you utilize this as a creative person. Mm-hmm. It's almost like taking a step back from that and you almost become the director instead mm-hmm. of the actual creator of the work. What are your thoughts on kind of how that plays into the whole thing?
Does the visual work pretty similar to the language models? I haven't experimented with the visual ones, but are you giving it a prompt, I guess, and just telling it like what style you want or colors or what do you feed into it?
Yeah, that there's websites like Dolly and like logomaker.ai. Again, has a lot of learning to do, and it is as good as what you put into it, but when I tried making our logo and told it Clementine Creative Agency, that was not the name that it gave us. It was like Clementine, so, it even...
Not ideal.
No, that is not ideal. But, when you try to be specific about it, sometimes it takes that, sometimes it doesn't. But it does work because Nutella actually used AI to generate 7 million different package designs. It was all different label designs. Yeah. And I couldn't find how long it took them. I'm sure it's just a matter of seconds. Sure. You put in patterns and colors and, you let it run. And I'm sure in a matter of minutes or seconds, they had 7 million different package designs.
Yeah. Well, kind of back to your comment, then it's sort of a different spin on creativity because mm-hmm. the skill you have to hone to be able to use this is to be able to articulate very specifically what you're trying to get the system to produce for you.
Right.
Rather than just sort of, doing that more organically and developing it as you go.
Yeah. And especially as a visual person, if you're used to doing things in a visual nature, you kind of have to change or learn a new language to be able to tell it to prompt it in the right way to get the result that you're looking for. And regardless of that, I don't know what your experience has been, but regardless of what you put into it, you're not going to get exactly what's in your head. So, it's playing off of, it's very derivative in nature, obviously. And you guys can speak to kind of how it pulls information and where it's pulling it from. But it's obviously not pulling it straight out of your brain. It's pulling it from their database.
Not yet.
Yes, right. That's the scary part. Yeah. Which, at this point is the open database of everything that's on the internet, mm-hmm. textbooks and things like that.
Yeah. Just because you find something on Google image search does not mean that it's legal for you to use. It's basically sampling from existing things. Mm-hmm. And so that'll bring us into one of our other topics is, the legality and the issues with that.
Yeah. So in your experience, Jennifer, when you're putting in a prompt and you're getting this result, maybe it's something longer than like a 20-word result, but maybe it's a blog post or something like that. What are your concerns or have you had any issues with testing and the result that you get back feeling like it might have come from somewhere else?
Yeah. I don't know about coming from somewhere else. It's hard to tell. I think that the things that you get back were interesting, certainly, in the initial test that I did. It can certainly generate a lot of material, very, very quickly. So, that's an advantage, I guess, if you're Nutella and you're trying to make 7 million packages, right, you're probably not going to get a graphic designer to do that willingly.
Not in minutes.
But I would say first, most of what the output I saw is something I would consider as like a starting point to sort of refine and edit from there. I don't know that, and I haven't done extensive amounts of testing, but in testing different types of things in the system, I don't know that there was anything that it spit out that I would go like, yep, that's it, that's done, and take it just as it is. I think some of what seems to me to be good at is a little bit more technical stuff. So when you think about using it to write search ads or search content where you're giving it keywords and a focus, and it's generating what it thinks Google wants to read, which is a really weird loop to get into because an AI is trying to talk to a Google search algorithm and, will that computer do a good job of talking to the other computer? Will it do a better job than we would?
Right.
I guess we're going to find out pretty soon.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's certainly a concern that you don't really know exactly where it's sourcing all this material from, where it's coming from, whether it's pulling too directly from another source. And so, obviously there are like plagiarism checkers and things like that you can run things through online for text to make sure that you're not lifting anything too directly or that it's not lifting anything too directly. Right. And I don't know. I would certainly be very wary of that with anything that gets longer form when you get into blog posts or essays or things like that are much, much longer. There's a lot more opportunity for bigger chunks to be pulled out of the source material.
Yeah, I think one of my big thoughts or concerns when I first started hearing about this is when you consider its source, which is the internet, and, regardless of what you believe, not everything on the internet is true or factually based. So if you're writing a report or something that's based on some sort of data, like, you don't know that what it's spitting out is actually based in reality.
And we've definitely seen some really high profile examples of some of these types of AI programs, making some pretty serious missteps in the information that they're spitting out. Because again, like any system, right? It's only as good as the quality of what's going into it in terms of what it's going to generate back for you.
Right. But I guess that's what you get for testing it out. And I know a lot of these systems are kind of in beta mode now, so it releases them of any liability or wrongdoing.
Yeah.
And, I think it's just kind of interesting how things are starting to play out, and where do we think this jumping off point and the acceptance point is for the public?
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting question to see how people are going to respond to this, obviously not just from a plagiarism perspective, but, there've been a lot of ethical questions around people using it for various things. And of course, people cheating on their term papers by having them generated by AI. I know that there's a lot of development going on now that, beyond those regular sort of plagiarism checkers we think of that are basically like AI content detectors that are seeking to be able to differentiate whether this was written by AI or this was written by a human. OpenAI has released one of their own.
That's interesting.
But everything I've read, the initial tests that they've done have proven it's pretty hard to tell the difference sometimes. And that a lot of the AI generated text is really good at fooling these detector programs into, it can't differentiate between that and something that was written by a human necessarily.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Well, and when people stop using it as a tool and just use whatever it spits out as verbatim is where, that's going to be the issue. Because it's great at, like, if you're trying to design a logo, it can spit out a lot of different concepts that you can build on, but you would never take, that's like using clip art for a logo.
Right.
Some people might use clip art for a logo, but if you're trying to, design a unique brand and isn't something that somebody can just go, oh, I can use that same little glyph, in my logo, you're trying to be unique. You're trying to design something that's original to your brand. And when you stop, using that, as a tool and using it as the final design, that's where there's a problem.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think that there's an aspect of this that, you can't take the human out of it, or it starts to fail, or you can tell that it's not real, or, it's like there's an aspect of it that textually based, you still want it to speak to your brand's tone,
right,
and in your brand voice, and the same from a visual perspective. If you've gone off base there, then what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the things, talking about it, when you get long form text in particular, it's very noticeable. I mean, you can tell it a tone, but you tell it to be like, be fun, be witty, but it still isn't going to be exactly the voice that you as an individual would have written it, or as a brand, or as a bit, from that particular perspective. So I think you still have to, be able to bring that human element of creativity to the equation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always, I've started to say, AI can take this and that and this and that away from me, but it can't take away my imagination. It can't take away my creativity. These are things that I have that it doesn't have control of. So even if I were to take or use something as inspiration or prompt it with something to get an idea, it's really still all originating from my brain to start.
Right.
So it's kind of an interesting play. There's probably a back and forth that we could have for hours.
Sure, yeah.
But I want to kind of go into a little bit of a rapid fire question and answer on where we think AI can, in its current state, can be utilized. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to shoot these out and you guys let me know what you think. Short form text.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Long form text.
It's not as good.
What about like blog posts?
I mean, I think the same thing. Good starting point, but needs work on tone.
Okay. Social posts.
Pretty good.
I know neither of you are web designers, but from what I've heard, web code, not so much. Not there yet. What about SEO?
Yeah, that one I think is interesting to test. I think it has real potential there.
Yeah. Love it.
Needs work. Great for concepts, but not for final.
Yeah. Photography?
Ethically questionable. Great if you want a kitten flying in space on a donut, right. But it'll make it for you.
Doesn't?
Yeah, right. But yeah, that one is questionable.
Yeah. Illustration,
same. Questionable.
What about like renderings, architecture, things like that?
As a tool, great. But I would never
Would you build anything that was based on an AI?
Not without careful review.
And then, there's always this concern as anything new and people start to get used to this new innovation and change and all of that. There's, among other concerns, this feeling that AI is going to take over and AI is going to take our jobs. What are your opinions there?
I mean, in its current form, I don't think so. I think it still requires a lot of human input. I think it still requires a lot of refining in terms of what comes out the other end. And as we said, I think, that individual human creative element is just something that you can't really replicate in this format. And so I do think, though, that it could have a significant impact on a lot of different jobs out there in terms of, being able to produce large volumes in less time that, could impact workloads and things of that nature. But I don't think it's ready to set out on its own yet.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely a tool and not a replacement for a designer.
Mm-hmm. Well, regardless of everything that anybody might think, the cat is kind of out of the bag at this point.
For sure.
So, and I don't think cats like to go back in the bags once they're out. I can only really imagine where we're headed with this. Do you guys, I'd love to hear some predictions on where you think it's going.
I think from a graphic standpoint, it does have a lot of development, but it may become like you have places where you get stock images and stock clip art type things. And so it may be a paid, once they get it working better, that you would pay to have that generate things for you. But again, I wouldn't use it as a final, because who's to say that that's really unique to you? If somebody put in the same parameters, but just named it Orange Creative Agency, then they're going to have exactly the same as you. So it's no better than clip art.
And it all ends up going into this public database too. That's the other part of it is, one, it's pulling from an open database, which is everything, on the internet to start. And that includes everything that's on your website, my website, any other business. So that all becomes part of its database that it can pull as a source for whatever else it's creating, which I find really interesting, because there's no real way at this moment in time to opt out of that. Which I know is another point of contention for many. But also when you create these images, and that becomes, again, part of this open database that other people can then pull from. So you're not necessarily creating anything unique. I mean, it's unique, but it's not wholly unique.
Right. Yeah. It's a different combination of the elements that it's pulling out. And I think on the text, on the language-based side, it's very much the same. It seems to be a little further along down that path than the visual side of things seem to be right now. And I do think it's going to be interesting to see this proliferate, because I think it's already really caught on from a text perspective, and people using it to generate all kinds of things, for better or worse. I think that it's going to be a really interesting impact in the world of sort of search, when you think about SEO and you think about web search and things like that, from a lot of different perspectives. I mean, just imagining the sheer volume of content that AI could generate, and also how that's going to affect optimizing for search. How is it going to affect what we consider kind of the traditional search engines themselves and how they function? And, how do you optimize your website for that now? Or how do you optimize it to be a source? Or do you want it to be a source? Or, all of those kinds of questions, I think, are things that we're going to have to wrestle with sooner rather than later, because it's really growing so quickly.
Any other final thoughts?
This is definitely something interesting that I would definitely keep an eye on. It's got great potential, but with great power comes great responsibility, as someone said.
Well, thank you guys for joining me on this episode. I think we've given ourselves and hopefully the audience a lot to think about, a lot to chew on here. That wraps up another episode of the Feel Good podcast. Don't forget that you can always check us out on any of your podcast listening devices and platforms, as well as on YouTube. So go ahead and subscribe, listen to past episodes, and get notified about ones coming up in the future.